I got a phone call this morning from from a friend of mine. You think you're cool with you? I don't know yet. I was just listening to some stuff. I just didn't want to sit at home. Why? Oh, I didn't feel like it. The New York night was freezing in 1980. Less than 2 hours after John Lennon collapsed at the doorway of the Dakota building, Paul McCartney's phone in the English countryside rang incessantly. 3 days later, while the world was still mourning the Beatles' legend, Paul unexpectedly appeared at the FBI headquarters as a guest for cooperation in the investigation. And I couldn't take it in. I just know, just for days, you just couldn't think that he was gone. The interrogation lasted for hours, thoroughly exploring every corner of the two men's relationship. Paul revealed several things. From their reconciliation just before the tragedy, John's days filled with fear and anxiety about someone watching him, to Paul's complex feelings toward Yoko Ono. More notably, Paul disclosed the contents of John's final letter, found in his study, which brought Paul to tears. What did Paul McCartney reveal about John Lennon's final days? And was John's death simply the act of a crazed fan, as the police announced? One winter morning in 1980, the telephone rang in the house in the English countryside. Paul McCartney was making tea when he heard his wife call from the living room. He picked up, and in that moment, the world seemed to stop. John is dead. In New York. Paul froze. He couldn't believe his ears, only repeating, "No way, it can't be. You're kidding me, right?" His friend's voice on the other end was trembling. He passed away right in front of his door, in front of Yoko. This news didn't sober Paul. It plunged him into deeper shock. His mind went blank. John, dead? What the hell was happening? His old friend, partner, the brilliant brother who stood beside him through an entire era. How could he disappear so senselessly? He placed the receiver down mechanically. The English winter suddenly became utterly bleak. Paul just stood there, trying to find an explanation for the nightmare that had just struck. He was expressionless, just a complete numbness, a shock that had drowned every emotion. December 9th, 1980. A day after John Lennon's death, Paul McCartney tried to go to the studio to finish some tracks. Paul described it as a cold stupor, where everything around him seemed normal. As he walked out of the MPL studio in London, he saw dozens of reporters waiting at the gate. Camera flashes relentlessly fired, microphones shoved close to his face. Someone shouted, "Paul, how do you feel about John's death?" He replied with only a brief sentence, "It's a drag." That phrase instantly exploded. Headlines screamed, "Paul McCartney cold toward John's death." The public judged and criticized him, calling him emotionless, but no one knew. That was the only way Paul could suppress the rising panic and pain. As soon as the cameras turned off, Paul quickly got into his car. In that private darkness, Paul McCartney, the man who had co-written timeless songs with John Lennon, finally broke down and sobbed like a child. 2 days later, Paul received a call from the U.S. Embassy in London. They requested his presence to assist with the investigation. The name FBI stunned Paul. Initially, he thought it was just standard procedure, but upon arrival, Paul realized things weren't as simple as he imagined. In the interrogation room, Paul McCartney sat opposite two agents. The dark circles under his eyes and his tightly clasped hands betrayed a sleepless night. The atmosphere abruptly shifted when a third agent entered and began to explain. John Lennon's case was being examined with multiple factors. Lennon had been on the FBI's watch list throughout the 70s due to his anti-war activities, with a complex and detailed file. The focus of the questions now shifted straight to those who had recently been in contact with John. According to witnesses there, Paul McCartney was visibly strained. He spoke slowly, his voice slightly hoarse. "John once told me he felt watched, but I never imagined things would end this way." An agent looked straight at Paul, his gaze sharp. Mr. McCartney, based on what John shared, do you think this was the act of a single individual, or was there an organization, a power behind it? Paul couldn't answer. He just looked down at a radiant picture of John Lennon placed on the table and offered a wry smile. I only recently reconnected with him. According to Paul's account, after the Beatles broke up, John Lennon virtually vanished from the world. He isolated himself in his high-rise apartment at the Dakota Building. Outside, hundreds of fans still waited daily, but inside, John lived in silence, the curtains always drawn. He rarely went out, unless Yoko was with him. One autumn night, John called Paul. His voice was shaking. "There's a guy in a brown coat. He follows me everywhere. The coffee shop, the studio, even to the Dakota gate. He never looks at me, just stands a few meters away, silently." At the time, Paul thought John was just being paranoid. But 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at the Lennon apartment. Inside was a secretly taken photo of him from behind the Dakota, accompanied by a smeared red message: "We are watching you." From that day on, John couldn't sleep. The lights in the living room stayed on all night. He told Yoko he heard footsteps in the hallway, metal sounds outside the door, then silence. Once he insisted someone stood outside his door for a few minutes before disappearing. The guard checked the cameras. Indeed, a figure had briefly passed, but the recording cut off immediately after. John began to live like a hunted man. He avoided standing near the windows, cut his recording session short to return home early. The housekeeper recounted that he made them check the locks up to 7 times every night. But the most terrifying thing was the strange envelopes that continued to appear. "Your music has hurt me." When the murder happened, Paul realized everything John had said was true. But the police had dismissed it, attributing it to anxiety from the pressure of fame, and ignored it. Only 13 days later, John Lennon died right in front of his home. And surprisingly, the perpetrator was Mark David Chapman, a lunatic disguised as a fan. When the FBI handed over the case file, Paul learned another chilling detail. In John's desk drawer, they found a black list, naming those he suspected, a few reporters, some strange names, and one person no one knew. The note was sealed in the classified file along with the cold assessment. Subject exhibited abnormal behavior. But those who truly understood John Lennon knew. He wasn't crazy. He had sensed something others didn't see. And the tragedy was, he was right. But things didn't stop there. About an hour after the interrogation was temporarily closed, Paul unexpectedly requested to see the agents again. His voice was low, halting, as if he was struggling between speaking out and keeping it secret forever. "There's one thing I haven't told you," he said. "A few days before John died, I received a letter from him." The agents exchanged glances, immediately turning the recorder back on. Paul took an old envelope from his inside pocket, the edges frayed. Inside was a thin piece of paper, folded into thirds, yellowed and marked with hand sweat. When he opened it, the investigators were stunned. The handwriting was slanted and rushed. In the upper corner was November 1980, just 13 days before John Lennon passed away. The content was brief, just a few lines. "Paulie, I know we've said terrible things, but I think it's time to end the mess. I miss the days when we just laughed and wrote music. No one needed to win. If you agree, let's be friends again. John." Paul sat frozen. His hand trembled as he reread every word, his lips mumbling it like a missed prayer. The room around him seemed to sway. A rush of memories flooded Paul's mind. The frantic recording sessions, the fiery arguments, the times they turned their backs and left without a goodbye. This letter, if it had been sent just